Hello everyone, this is Karl Trellinger with Syngenta Flowers. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about key growing tips for propagation and the early part of finishing of poinsettias, and then afterwards about 4 new varieties that we think are really important to observe this season. I will not talk about all the growing tips and will focus on the ones that address problems that we run into every year. The proper misting is extremely important. Misting should be started early and frequently so the cuttings never wilt. What's really important is to have plenty of shade to make sure that the light is less than 1200 foot candles. Even 600 foot candles is enough for the first 5-6 days or so to make sure that misting can be reduced and also the heat buildup in the greenhouse is as little as possible. High water quality, of course, is critical. A very important part of propagating poinsettias is spraying Capsil. Capsil should be sprayed as soon as possible to make sure that the leaves are taking up the water immediately. So if you look at the picture to the left, no Capsil was applied, so there's a lot of water beating up on the leaves. The picture on the right, Capsil was sprayed. So a very nice film of water that ensures that the water is taken up properly, and also that means that less mist can be applied. So Capsil should be applied at the rate of 2 to 4 ounces per 100 gallons. If the water is very soft, then maybe 1 ounce is enough. The key is to not have any water beads standing on the leaves. One really important part in propagation is to make sure to not get fungus, gnats and flies. And for that, it is extremely important to have good sanitation procedures before the cuttings get stuck. So a variety of chemicals are listed. The key is to apply chemicals several times, to scrub the walls, to have no algae, no dirt. It has to be really clean. So if the greenhouse is completely clean, then the chance to get fungus, gnats and flies established is minimal. Another thing that's really important is to make sure that yellow sticky cards are hung above the floor just to make sure there are no flies and fungus gnats around. I listed several control options, and of all of those, right now the one that gains the most traction is citation. And the big advantage of citation is it also controls the larval stages of flies, and the other thing is it's very easy on the foliage, so the chance for any problems with citation is minimal. I just want to point out at that point that distance can work, but it also can cause problems if it's over applied, so we do not recommend distance. Regarding nematodes, they work really well. Ideally, they should be applied weekly and maybe every 2 weeks if there is not a lot of fungus gnats around. And also hypoaspis works pretty well. But in general, citation is probably the best way to go. Light levels. As mentioned before, it's really important to have good light levels. 800 to 1000 foot candles, which is about 4 to 5 moles per day for the first 10 to 12 days, is ideal. If it's very dry, then even going down to 600 foot candles works really well. Like that, the temperature is reduced and the need for misting is significantly cut back. And like that, nutrients are leached out much less, which is really important, and also much less diseases. So if growers propagate under high light conditions, there is clearly the danger of diseases, but also to leach out the nutrients which gonna take quite a while to bring them back. So after they make callus, then the light can be increased to about 1500 to 2000 foot candles, which is about 8 to 10 moles per day, for the next 5 to 7 days, to make sure that the cuttings get acclimated to higher light levels after transplanting. And additionally to that, after that period, once the cuttings are well rooted, which is about 2 to 2.5 weeks after sticking, the light intensity should be increased to 3500 foot candles, which is about 15 to 18 moles. Fertilization. What's really important is to start early. So fertilization can start or should start about 6 to 8 days after sticking, when the callus is developing. The earlier, the better. 100 parts per million nitrogen of a fertilizer that doesn't have phosphorus, like a 15015 or 14014, is the way to go. So in general, we recommend to not have any phosphorus in the fertilizer in propagation, and ideally also in the first stages of the transplant. Once the roots are starting to grow, the rates can be increased to 150 ppm nitrogen and potassium, and then to 200 ppm, about 2 to 2.5 weeks after sticking. And it's very important to rinse off the fertilizer with clean water after feeding, especially once the fertilization is increased to 150 or 200 ppm nitrogen and potassium. The most important disease in propagation is Erwinia, and Erwinia in general gets started if cuttings get warmed up in transport. So if the cuttings are arriving warm, then it's really important to cool them down and to make sure that to apply chemicals, and we're going to discuss it in the next slide. And the other thing what's really important is to get rid of all infected cuttings immediately. So how to prevent Erwinia? The most important thing is, of course, to have cuttings arrive in a cool condition, about 50 to 55 degrees. But if not, then they can be cooled down, and they actually should be cooled down. And then in the initial phases, to provide high shade to cool down the propagation area and to reduce the amount of mist dramatically. So the shade, as I mentioned before, absolutely critical. Also applying Capsil to make sure that the amount of mist is reduced. As mentioned before, cuttings that arrive warm should be placed in the cooler at around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. That in general is anyhow a good idea. A chemical that helps really well is Clean Grow. The springe application should be done at 6 ounces per 100 gallons, not more than that. Sometimes there can be toxicity, so it's really important to check out Clean Grow with trials before. But normally the 6 ounce per 100 gallons rate works well. A lot of growers spray or springe Clean Grow first and then come in with fungicides like Medallion, for example. Some are even combining both. The picture to the right is very commonly seen, and it happens a lot, not just in propagation, but also afterwards, when growers add phosphorus back into the feed and do not rinse the fertilizer off the foliage. So if phosphorus is in the feed, rinsing the fertilizer off the foliage is absolutely critical. Ideally, for the first few weeks, phosphorus is really not needed, so a 14014, 15015 work really well. Nevertheless, after application of fertilizer, it always should be rinsed off. This slide is really interesting. Here, a fertilizer was applied that contained phosphorus, and the plant to the left was rinsed off immediately afterwards. The plant to the right, not. So the plant to the right shows clearly phosphorus toxicity, and that basically means the leaves are really small and hard. So that's clearly phosphorus in propagation. But we still recommend to not have any phosphorus in the feed. So this doesn't even happen. But in case you see the symptoms in the picture on the right, then this is clearly phosphorus. The burn on the plant on the picture to the right has nothing to do with phosphorus. That is just general fertilizer burn under hot conditions with high light. So therefore, it's really important, especially in the early stages, if overhead fertilization is used, to make sure to rinse off immediately after fertilization. A few words on the effects of heat stress. There are some varieties that get distorted foliage, like the one on the top and the one on the bottom. Most varieties that do that are eliminated by now, but even if that doesn't occur, if the media temperature is above 85 degrees, then the roots are just not working properly anymore. And the foliage is kind of wilting and the plants get stunted. And also the roots are going to suffer. So it's really important to apply extra shade to mist the foliage as much as possible and to irrigate in the middle afternoon when it's the hottest. A few words on early season height control. Using Florel is the way to go. Florel has the big advantage that it creates short internodes and the most uniform branching. The other thing that's really nice about Florel is that the plants always grow out of it after about 2 weeks. So after spraying Florel, it might look like the plant is not growing much, but it's always going to grow out of it, and it's always going to grow out of it really nicely. Some people don't like Florel for whatever reason. Cycocel, especially under cooler conditions, works really well, and Cycocel benign under hot conditions also, but keep in mind that Cycocel benign can create problems. And if too much is applied, then they might not grow out of it. So our preference is clearly Florel. The spray rate is 500 ppm, and for the best effect, it's really important to apply it uniformly and to combine it with 2 to 4 ounces of Capsil, and to spray it early in the morning to make sure the foliage is wet for at least an hour, ideally for 2 hours. The first spray should be done about 5 to 7 days before pinching. Of course, the plants have to be rooted really well at the time. And the second spray about 5 to 7 days after pinching. And that is commonly called the Florel sandwich. Now on more vigorous varieties, like for example Lyra, a third spray about a week to 2 weeks after the second spray is really recommended to make sure the plant stays compact and the internodes don't stretch. Now what's really important with Florel is that it should be discontinued before September 15th to make sure there is no flower delay. Florel is a cheap chemical, works well, and clearly we think the way to go. Now just a few comments on 4 varieties that are new. Candy Bubblegum is a really nice pink variety. It is early to medium timing, so comes to flower about November 15 to 22. Has a really nice, attractive hot pink color, nice, smooth, rounded bracts, a good V-shaped habit, and it is new breeding. It's not a sport of older genetics, so it will not sport back to some other color. So the color is always like you see on the picture here. The growth rate is medium to vigorous, so it's excellent for 8-inch and 10-inch containers, but of course also for 6 and 6.5-inch containers. It's not recommended for the far south because it can heat delay. It's a very good alternative to Polis Pink from Dümmen. Now, a variety that's probably going to be really important, especially in the south, is Serena Red. We noticed last year that Serena does not heat delay, and that is a very big benefit, as there are not a lot of good varieties that don't heat delay. It is early to medium timing, so flowers around November 15 to 22, has a really attractive bright red color, nice big bracts, and most importantly, very strong stems and a nice V-shaped habit. It's medium to vigorous and best suited for 6-inch to 10-inch pots. So regarding heat tolerance, it's one of the best varieties there are. So very similar to Orion Early Red and Robin Red and Moss Early Red. The big advantage of it is it's later. So all the other ones are early, so this is medium timing. So we think this is going to be really important. So it's critical to observe how it's doing this year. We did not have a lot of cuttings available this year, but for next year we're going to build up a lot. So it's really important to keep an eye on it. Another thing that's really nice is that it has excellent shelf life. So it won the LTO award in Holland, and it's one of the best varieties regarding post-harvest performance. A really nice new variety is also Gemma Red. It's medium timing, 8.5 weeks, and comes to flower about November 21 to 28. It looks a little bit like Mirage, has really nice rich red color and very nice Aethias. It has a great upright habit and doesn't stretch at the end of production. It's best to be used for 4-inch to about 6.5-inch. The reason for that is the bract size is medium. The plant that you see here was pinched on 10 leaves, which is too much. So for 4 or 6 or 6.5-inch containers, it should be pinched on maybe 6 to 8 leaves, not more than that. It can be used for 8 and 10-inch containers, but we feel it's really best for 4-inch to 6-inch. It's very good for all climates except in the deep south, as it will heat delay. So the last variety I want to talk about is Draco Red. Draco Red is a gorgeous variety. It has huge bracts, it has a fantastic color, good Aethias, and it reminds a little bit of Prestige. The big advantage over Prestige though is the deep red color, so it doesn't have a blue tinge to it, and the bracts are all on top, so there is not a lot of green foliage looking through. It is the perfect plant for high-end retail, and it flowers about end of November until middle of December. So we think it's a perfect variety for the last part of the poinsettia season. It has a great V-shaped habit and very good stem strength. Medium vigor, so it works in all pot sizes. It's good for all climates except in the deep south, where it's very late and can heat delay. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.